Welcome to our webinar, How to Sound Off About Fracking. So, most of you are aware of the proposed fracking regulations that were published by the Delaware River Basin Commission on October 28th. And that's one of the reasons you're here tonight. We are entering the last 2.5 weeks of the comment period, which ends on February 28th. People have been commenting on the draft regulations throughout this entire period. Many of you using our Watershed Wednesday comment platform, and that campaign has been focusing on an aspect of the rules every Wednesday, offering a real deep dive into the issue that we're focusing on that week to help folks prepare substantive comments. And thank you to all of you who've been taking part. Watershed Wednesdays will continue every Wednesday through to the end of the comment period, February 28th. So people have also testified at the Drbc hearings, and thank you for doing that. They were held in December and then also last week. And also folks have been participating in social media. We've had 3 social media storms. Well, the 3rd one is coming up on Monday, and various outreach campaigns. And all of this is to try to attract more and substantive comments into the record from a real diversity of participants. So as most of you are aware, the land and water discharge of wastewater produced by fracking is proposed to be banned by the Drbc in these draft regs, but the import of this toxic and radioactive wastewater into the watershed is not banned. And also the export of water to be used to frack wells outside of the basin would be allowed under the draft rules. And this is what we're all fighting about. So 1 year ago this month, just to kind of show you where we're at, the Delaware River Basin Commission permanently banned fracking throughout the Delaware River watershed. And that, is an historic achievement. Many of you worked for it for more than a decade. But we are now engaged in the draft rules to try to get them changed to achieve a fully frack-free Delaware River watershed. And we want these draft rules changed to categorically ban the import of fracking wastewater and also ban the export of water to be used to frack and ruin other watersheds. And while also depleting our own water and degrading our own water quality. But we're fighting to make sure that not only is fracking banned, but fracking pollution is fully prevented to save the Delaware River watershed. Drinking water supply for 17 million people. And also we need to protect the human and the non-human communities and habitats. These are irreplaceable assets that all of us hold dear. We treasure these, and future generations really need this water and need these ecosystems, need this valuable watershed. So that's why it's so important to spread the word. And we're going to hear tonight how letters to the editor can do that this month. So you're going to hear more about what is in the draft rules later, and that will be from Barbara Arundel. She's going to give you tips to help you write an informative letter to catch people's interest. And first, however, we're going to hear from Eric Weltman. He's going to talk about the purpose and the power of letters to the editor, tips on key elements to include, and also what we hope to accomplish with public letters regarding our frack ban campaign and the draft fracking rules. Then we're going to hear from Karen Feridan about how to successfully submit a letter, where to go, the nitty-gritty of getting your letter published. Following Karen will be Barbara Arundel, who will present some succinct talking points that you're going to want to include in your letter so that people get what you're saying and they're inspired to submit a comment right now to the Delaware River Basin Commission, only 2.5 weeks left. So after Barbara, Karen is going to be moderating a question and answer session. Also, as we go along, we'd like to ask a favor of you. If you can think of any hashtags or taglines, social media tweets that you want to suggest we include in our upcoming social media storm. That's this Monday. It's called Love the River Day, Valentine's Day, February 14th. Please put those in the chat. We're looking for your ideas about how to reach people through social media on Monday. We'd love to include them in our toolkit for that day. So stick them in there, and we'll be putting them into that toolkit, which will go into our Watershed Wednesday Delaware River Frack Ban website. The link to that is going to go in the chat. It's also going to be on a slide at the end when Eric closes us out. So without anything further, if you have any questions as we go along, remember, put them in the Q&A. Make sure to introduce yourself in the chat. And right now I'm going to turn it over to Eric Weltman from Food and Water Watch. Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you. Good evening, folks. So again, my name is Eric Weltman. I'm a Brooklyn-based senior organizer with Food and Water Watch. Thanks for joining us tonight. By way of introduction, I just want to mention that I've published probably over 100 letters to the editor, or hundreds in the past 30 years, but never one in the New York Times. And there's a reason. I've never submitted one there. We're going to briefly cover two things this evening, the first of which might help explain why I've never sent an LTE, as they're known, to the Times. First, what purposes do LTEs serve, and what purposes might your LTE serve? And then tips for publishing an LTE. Before I dive in, a few things. First of all, I want to put my email address in the chat. You're welcome to follow up if you have any questions for me. Second, I want to note the LTE page is one of the most widely read sections of the newspaper, and for a good reason. People want to hear what their neighbors think, and they can be extremely entertaining. If you happen to live in New York like I do, or want to take a look online, the Daily News letter to editor section is absolutely pure entertainment. Anything goes. The third thing I would note is that some major newspapers only publish LTEs in response to articles that they published, but most regional dailies and neighborhood weeklies do not. They'll publish just about any reader opinion on any topic or of interest or relevance. And fourth, and I want to emphasize this, a good LTE should very clearly identify both your problem and your solution. That is, what you want done and who you want to do it. And then fifth, a request of folks in the audience there, please put in the chat the names of your local newspapers, whether they're weeklies or dailies, where you think you could, or better yet, will submit an LTE. So what is the purpose of an LTE? Well, they can advance our work in at least 8 ways. That's a lot of ways. One, they can educate the public both about a problem and its solution, and in doing so, help motivate people to take action. That's number one. 2, they can pressure decision makers, most often an elected official, by calling on him or her to do something. And the key in this instance is to name names, be very precise. You want Representative Jones or Governor Smith to do such a thing. Conversely, LTs are a great way to thank an elected official for doing the right thing, and do so, obviously, publicly. Fourth, they can show power. You can show your levels of support by saying, I'm part of, Food and Water Watch, and we're part of the Drbc Frack Ban Coalition with Catskill Mountain Keeper and all these other great organizations and thousands of supporters. So they can show power. They can provide visibility for your own organization. That's always a good thing. 6, you can share opportunities to take action, and that's obviously what we're focusing on tonight. You're talking about encouraging people to submit public comments to the DRBC and giving them the mechanism for doing so. So not only inspiring them to take action, not only suggesting how they can take action, but literally giving them the tool to do so. They can involve people in our work. LTs are a great way to get people engaged, whether it's friends, families, neighbors, colleagues, other fellow activists. And finally, they're great for posting on social media. It's great content. If you want to spread the word about an issue or an action, having an LT published in your local paper is a great thing a tool for amplifying your message by sharing it on Facebook, Twitter, and so forth. And so to get to the question, so the point is that the LTs can be a tremendous tool, a finely tuned tool for organizing and advocacy and to advance our campaigns. And like most tools, it's most effective when it's used in very precise, targeted ways. So why have I never submitted an LT to the New York Times? Well, the Times, of course, is an internationally read newspaper. I happen to read it myself and love it. But the universe of people that I'm trying to influence in the course of my activism and my organizing is never. I'm never trying to engage the entire world. So if I were trying to get a representative to take action on something, for example, the Times would not be my platform of choice to exert such influence. So I've never submitted an LT to New York Times, but I've proudly published scores of letters in the Brooklyn Eagle and many other local outlets where they have, I think, considerable influence, but again, in a very fine-tuned manner. So that's just an overview of what kind of purposes or functions LTs can and could play. And again, your letters for purposes of tonight's meeting may not necessarily fulfill all those roles, but to the extent that you can cram meet many of them, that's a good thing. All right. So tips for publishing a powerful LT. First and foremost, and I think Karen will touch upon this as well, check the newspaper guidelines and read the LT page a few times to get a sense of the content and tone. So as well as, of course, word count and length. But you want to try to the extent you can, match the tone of the newspaper and sort of match the content. The second is an acronym, KISS. KISS, which is keep it short and simple. So short, you should be able to say everything you need to say in about 150 words, maybe 5 to 8 sentences or even less. I know it can be a challenge, but I think it's an important one. And here's the thing. Shorter letters are more likely to get published. Also more likely to be read in their entirety or even at all. So a lot of people, when they're confronted with a very lengthy document, you might think that they, skim it or read the first paragraph or two, but many of them are likely to skip it altogether. So again, if the shorter the letter, the more likely it is to get published and the more likely it is to get read in its entirety. Another point. Make it personal. Indicate why the issue matters to you. Tell a story. Give an insight into yourself. Talk about your kids, your family, your loved ones. Personal incidents in the past where you've enjoyed the river, or been concerned about the safety of water, or fears about climate change and the consequences of fracking. You make it personal. That's what's going to be memorable and have an impact and inspire and motivate people. Keep it local. Explain why this issue matters to your community, so not only you and your family and your loved ones, but the community in general. And be very specific. Don't just say I'm concerned about the impacts of the community, but name the town that you're from, or name the local tributary to the watershed, or what have you. Whatever points of detail will make it really local. Go light on the statistics. I know that all our advocacy is backed by very compelling science. You do not need to reference all of that science in your letter. 1 or 2 statistics to substantiate your case, should be, enough to show that, that we are backed by science. We're not just making this up, but you don't want to go too heavy on the numbers. People aren't going to remember them. And again, identify the problem and the solution, what you want done, who you need to do it, and even, dare I say, when they need to do it by. So as specific as you can get about what the problem is, what the solution is, who needs to do what, and again, how the readers can get involved in taking action. Couple final points include links. These days, a lot of people get their content online, including, reading letters. So if you've got a couple of sources, you'd like to cite, link them, make them live links. And of course, opportunities to learn more, get involved, and take action, including, of course, the link to the DRBC portal for submitting comments. Submit it. Finally, again, I know Karen's going to discuss this a bit more, but submit it to the appropriate outlet, guided largely by the issue and who the target is. And again, that gets back to my discussion of why I've never submitted a letter to the New York Times. And finally, I'll just, before I hand things over to Karen, I'll put an example in the chat, which you may or may not have access to, but it's a link to a letter that I'm very proud of that was published in Newsday. So that's my piece, and I will kick things over to the amazing Karen. Woohoo!
Oh, brother, now I better do well. Thank you, Eric. So before I get started, I'm going to put something in the chat, and it is a spreadsheet that we'll be going over that we created a few years ago to try to make it easy to find all these guidelines that Eric was just talking about. And so we don't have by any means all of the papers that would pertain to something as big as the watershed and all of you who are here tonight, but I'm pulling it up. If it is helpful to you, feel free to click on it and use it. But really, I want to go through, what you see when you find the guidelines. If you're not a regular letter to the editor writer, you might not think about all the things that they want you to take into consideration. So we're going to review that really quickly. And I just wanted to reiterate what Eric was just talking about too, that it's so important right now in this moment. There will be plenty of moments to write letters to the editor about what the DRBC needs to do, but what we really need to emphasize tonight is what people need to do to tell the DRBC how they should, be ruling on these regulations. And so we want people to submit comments. And so, as Eric said, put the link into the letter, even if your paper doesn't require links. Put it there, because like he said, there's very likely an online version now, and that could be a hyperlink that will make it that much easier for people to find the comments, area of the DRBC website. So I just wanted to underscore that, because this is that moment that we're in. We're getting down to the wire on the comment period. So with that, I just put the thing in the chat. So now I'm going to share the screen and show you this spreadsheet I'm talking about. Okay, great. So this is this thing we created a few years ago. Like I said, it's still relevant. So like I said, if you're interested, if these are your papers, you can use it. But what we wanted to do was capture all this information, because when you go to a newspaper's website, number one, it's not always easy to find these submission guidelines. And if you can't find it, I would call the paper and ask them to direct you to them or provide them to you over the phone. But, we're trying to cut down on some of that legwork for people around here. And so we created this thing, and I thought I'd just take you through it to show the kinds of things papers care about. So first of all, there's just the basic information about the paper's name and its website, the coverage area. Then these days, you can submit various ways. You can submit it very often now on the website directly. And sometimes it's the easiest way to do it. But I got to tell you, I'm like Eric, I've written a gajillion letters, and I've had many out at the same time on different topics at various times. And so the paper calls to verify, and they say, tell us what your letter was about. I'm like, I don't know what was. So I always try to keep a paper copy, copy on my computer, or I submit it by email. So I have a record of it in my email, so I can go back and say, oh yeah, it was about XYZ. So keep that in mind. But if you're only writing one letter at a time, it certainly is convenient to post things right onto their website, and they ask you everything in the proper field. The next thing is to submit by email. I tend to do it that way for that reason I just gave, but you can also send paper mail still to the papers, fax it over, and then they provide a phone number. Not in all cases, as you might see, it's a little squished together, but some of the papers don't make it easy to call them. Some of them do. So if you really need to call the paper to ask about how to do your submission, at least in some cases, they'll make it easy for you by providing a phone number. But the real important first category here I really wanted to touch on for a minute here is the word limit. Like Eric was saying, keep it short, but different papers will have different limits and they'll take them pretty seriously. And one of the reasons why you want to take it seriously, other than good reasons that Eric provided, is that some papers will edit you, or they won't run your paper, your letter at all. And sometimes they'll contact you and say, can you shorten it? But if they take it into their own hands to either just not run it or to edit it, is almost worse, because they can absolutely flip your message around on you when they start editing, and they're not going to run it by you to make sure you're good with what they came up with. So try to adhere to the length at worst, keep it shorter if you can at best, but don't go beyond it, because you don't want them taking over the reins and changing your message around on you. Is it exclusive? This is an important one, especially for those of you who live in places where you have multiple papers in your area that you can be submitting to. Usually you're going to hear from a paper within a couple of days that they're interested in publishing your letter, and they give you that verification call I just mentioned. And sometimes that is an indication, if you haven't heard from them, that it's time to move on to the next paper, especially when we're in a tight deadline like this, if it's possible, do it. But when you're looking up the guidelines, you might find out, as you see here, we have 9 newspapers listed, and only 2 of them say that your letter is exclusive to them. So they might not care that you're submitting it to every paper in your area. And so that's good to know. You're not hamstrung by having sent something in and now you can't submit to anybody else. That's usually not the case, actually. Provide sources for that purpose of trying to get things hyperlinked online. In the online version, I do it everywhere. There's only one paper in our area that requires it, my hometown newspaper, but I still do it because it's just really important now that they're going to have an online version of it, and they may well make the hyperlink that makes your job that much easier of getting people to go and comment. Respond to content. That's another one. It's very helpful, even though it's not required, as you can see, most of the papers don't seem to care that much, except that they do care. And so if you can tie it to something they've written about, all the better. And I would not, though, and a lot of papers do this, they'll, like if the letter says, in your recent letter to the editor, and then you'll mention something that somebody else sent in, let's say, they'll parenthetically put the name of the thing or the name of the article you're referring to. That uses up words. So don't put it in there. Just say, in your recent thing, I noticed that somebody said X. Let them put that in and take up words. They'll do that. Don't take that out of your own words. Use every word you have to your, best use. Responding to content day, provide day, evening, phone. They want to be able to contact you, and for that verification call I just mentioned. Don't submit papers if you're thinking of writing a haiku on how your governor sucks or something. Don't submit poetry, school projects, and open letters. And so you don't want to write an open letter to the governor about how mad you are that they're thinking of voting this way. They're not going to publish that. It's a letter to the editor. Dear editor is the salutation. Write to them about, talk behind their backs about these guys that you don't like. And then frequency, this is an important one to remember too. 1 letter per some days, and it's a little hard to see with faces in the column over here, but it's usually like every 30 days, 60 days. Some of them, it's a matter of weeks that I have to wait for some of my local papers. But pay attention to that, because if you are a frequent writer and you were thinking of helping us out and you just sent something to your local paper, send it to another local paper. Keep that in mind so that at least you're eligible to be printed. I just wanted to suggest that also, I'm going to scroll back over here. we talked about posting the letter. It's really good as a follow-up to post the letter, even before they've decided to print it or not, on your Facebook page or something like that. And yeah, I always do that. I say, I hope they print it, you know, because then other people start reading it and they see what you were writing about. But for these purposes, to make it easy for us to find your letter that you've done this, if you would use the hashtag Watershed Wednesday, it'll make it that much easier for us to search around and see where these things are getting printed. It's good to have a sense of where we might need to send some letters ourselves, but we're also thrilled to read what you come up with. I think that's everything I've got for now, but I'll be happy to take your questions in the Q&A. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Barbara Arundel, who will help you with your content. Barbara.
Hi, thank you. Okay, so what's involved and why do we need to comment? 1 year ago, Drbc banned fracking to avoid pollution from fracking. Now the additional proposed regulation changes set up a loophole that allows import of frack waste into the Delaware River Basin from fracking outside the basin. Why would fracking be banned and its pollution be allowed? That's the question. So here's some of the details why you should be concerned and why you should comment. Direct discharge of the waste to land or water is prohibited, but import of the waste is allowed. This means that toxic and radioactive fracking wastewater will enter the watershed and cause pollution through other means of release than strictly, quote, discharge of to water or land, unquote. But for example, methods using evaporation, thermal oxidation, and other so-called zero discharge treatment methods will certainly cause extensive air pollution. DRBC's draft rules and the various states' so-called beneficial use rules encourage reuse of this wastewater for cooling water in manufacturing or by utilities, in construction, such as cement making, or in allowed storage or transfer stations, which will deliver fracking pollution through air emissions, leaks, spills, and stormwater events, causing the toxic and radioactive properties of fracking wastewater to pollute the Delaware River watershed. Remember also that everywhere this waste is moved around, there is illegal dumping, spills, and accidents involving 5,000 or even 10,000 gallon capacity trucks. Rural areas of the watershed and even near New York City reservoirs are narrow, winding roads where there could be spills, accidents, and illegal dumping. Who would know if a driver did not go to their intended destination and saved hours of driving by dumping in a rural area? So many instances like this have been noted in places where the waste is being moved about now. The waste is not tracked or manifested as it has exemptions as, quote, special, unquote, waste. Even companies have been found where all the paperwork was filled out correctly for no discharge treatment, but the waste was being simply pushed out through hidden pipes or drains onto land or into waterways. This can obviously be a health hazard, but also is an economic one. Besides the healthcare pain and costs, if your home's water is damaged, what is the home worth? In addition, the DRBC proposes to allow water to be exported from the Delaware River watershed for fracking outside the basin. This would induce more fracking, causing more pollution and more harm to human health and fish and wildlife. This would also deplete water and harm total ecosystems, especially in times of drought. The DRBC is obligated to ban the import of the waste and export of water from the watershed for fracking to protect the resources of the basin. That protecting the resources of the basin is the DRBC's reason for existence. And by doing so, by banning the import of waste and export of water, it will prevent pollution. So See Watershed Wednesdays for lots more details and references. And here's Karen with the Q&A.
Thanks, Barbara. And I wanted to encourage people, like I said in the chat, if you missed it, I know we have a lot of seasoned LTE writers out there. So if there are tips that I missed, if there are tips that Eric missed, I won't want to presume he did, but I know I probably did. Put them into the chat and we can talk about them in this period we have before we close for the evening. I actually did omit one that I wanted to say first because I had a list and I was reading and I skipped it. But the thing that I want to tell you is it's really important that you put the body, if you're doing it by email, like I like to send them in, put the letter in the body of the email. Don't put it as an attachment. They hate attachments, and some servers, security systems and newspapers won't let it through. It'll perceive it as spam or something. So take the letter and put it right into the body of the email, and you have a much better chance of having your letter seen. So I just wanted to mention that one. And I see Tracy just posted top 10 suggested talking points, which is a companion to what Barbara was just talking about, where really distilled it down and made some of the cases that we've been making for this span, like a short list of things that are sort of easy to grasp for people who haven't been paying that much attention to the issue, frankly. And so it just kind of distills it down for people and kind of gives the scope of how awful this is. But I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A right now. Anybody here, Barbara, Tracy, Eric, have any additional comments you'd like to make?
I have one that often the receiving entity, the website or newspaper, will ask for your name and phone number and that kind of thing, which you have to provide, but usually they don't publish. Maybe they don't publish your phone number, but they will ask for some of these things. So you have to provide to them whatever they ask. And, if you have questions, are they going to publish your phone number, whatever, you just ask them and they'll tell you, but you have to give them what they want.
Yeah, that's something that happens around here. The Reading Eagle, the paper of record in my county, requires municipality. I mean, even something like that, they don't want your city, they don't want your, town, because we have lots of towns around me. I'm in a borough, but a lot of things around here are called like Mertztown and things like that. They're not really what the paper wants to see. They want to see, Maxitani Township. So they ask for municipality specifically. I don't know that they're going to not publish you because you slipped up there, but it'll just delay it a little bit because they're going to have to reach you and get the information that they want. And again, with time being of the essence, better to just make it as right on as we possibly can, so that they are likely to publish it without even having to think about it.
Hey, I just want to remind folks, it might be a fruitful discussion if people could post in the chat what their local newspaper is, where they think they might want to submit an LT. I think we would love to see, as has been said, as many letters as we can get published in the next week or so. So if folks wouldn't mind, if which local outlet might be suitable for an LT, that just gives us a better sense ourselves of where we might expect to find letters at some point soon.
Yeah, the one thing I would add is that the timing of tonight's webinar is really based on the fact that the comment period to the Delaware River Basin Commission ends on February 28th. So what that means is the letter that you would write would need to include the points about why we need to fully ban frack wastewater and water export in the Delaware River watershed. And it can be as simple as that. I mean, maybe I'll put a couple of our tweets in that we've already prepared for Monday into the chat. It can be very simple. Protect the Delaware River watershed. I want to have clean drinking water. And the only way we can do this is to make sure that frack wastewater is not imported in our watershed. The industry is pushing to bring frack wastewater into this watershed because they have a glut of wastewater and they don't have any place to put it. They're over fracking, they're over draining the streams and waterways in the rest of Pennsylvania. So because they have this glut of wastewater, they want to dump it over here. And because they're draining the water over in the watersheds outside of the Delaware, they want to come and get our water. So this is really being driven by industry and throwing a couple good points, like the industry wants to use us as a dumping ground, get our water to continue fracking. Don't let it happen, DRBC. Please send a letter to the Delaware River Basin Commission and then give the link. The important thing is that this isn't the usual sort of letter to the editor where you're just kind of sounding off, even though the name of our webinar tonight is how to sound off about fracking. But what you're doing is you're telling them that there's an urgent need right now for a specific agency that's going to be making a decision about the future of the Delaware River watershed. And they are going to be deciding in the coming months, and we want to tell them what we want them to do, which is categorically ban frack wastewater and categorically ban the export of water for fracking. And then you tell them, listen, folks, we need to have lots of people from a lot of different areas, like our area where we live, speaking to the DRBC. Please tell them that. And if you want to do a more substantial comment, here's a link to the Delaware River Frack Ban website. We put that into the chat. We're also going to put it up at the end of the webinar. Or, provide a link to the 10 talking points, or just simply give the link to the comment portal at the DRBC and tell them they can do something as simple as save our watershed, save our water, don't bring frack waste in here, don't take our water out for fracking. I mean, it can be as simple as that, but that's the difference in this letter to the editor project that we're doing this month. The difference is that you're not just sounding off, you're actually telling them something very specific you want them to do in a very defined timeline. So what that means is we need to get these letters into news outlets really this week, because sometimes you have to wait, in line a little while. They might not put it up right away. There's a lot of letters that are being submitted. It might take a week before it shows up. So you don't want to miss out by having it sitting, on the desk at your local news outlet until after February 28th. So thinking up something and not overthinking it, just, putting something out there, expressing how you feel about why frack wastewater should be banned and why water should not be exported for fracking, and then what other people can do to say about it, to tell the DRBC about it, is really all you need to do. So it's just really a matter of, sounding off, but then telling them to sound off too.
Thanks, Tracy. And there are a couple of questions now. One in the chat asks, are there alternative safe solutions to toxic waste removal?
Yeah, well, we can talk about these things, but we're not going to go into a long technical. We've had many webinars on the technical issues, but it is a really good question. The bottom line is that fracking waste cannot be cleaned. It's toxic and radioactive. And really the problem is at the source. We shouldn't be fracking. So we're opposed to fracking, throughout everywhere that fracking is occurring. But what's happening is that they're creating this wastewater that is being improperly disposed of now. If it comes into our watershed, it's going to have toxic properties and it's going to be radioactive, and there's no way around that. I mean, one thing that they do, for instance, in some places, is in the end, you have a residue after you frack many wells with this frack wastewater that they're recycling, so-called, in Pennsylvania, and then the residue is so radioactive, it has to go to a similar depository as a nuclear power plant sends its radioactivity. They're not doing that much in Pennsylvania, but they're doing that in some other states. So you say, is there a safe way to get rid of it? Well, if you want to segregate it from the environment for 1600 years, yes. And I mean, that's what we're faced with. We really have to stop it at the source. It's just like, plastics pollution and everything. We've got to stop it at the source. But in the meantime, we're not going to have it dumped and we're not going to have it dumped in the way that they're dumping it now, which is to keep those toxic properties in the wastewater and just dilute it.
So,
Or take it to injection wells and inject it down deep into the ground where eventually, it ends up in the groundwater. It causes earthquakes. They had one that erupted in Ohio. Frack waste everywhere. It came up like a geyser because they had overfilled it. So these are not the solutions.
so I'd like to address a question that Brian posed. What politicians do we recommend be named? So the DRBC at the end of the day is comprised of the governors of the 4 states, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, as well as a representative from the Biden administration. So in theory, you could name the 4 governors, as well as obviously President Biden, who happens to be, of course, from Delaware and Pennsylvania. However, depending on the outlet and where you live, it'd be better to highlight your own particular governor. So if I were writing a letter, say, to the Brooklyn Eagle, I might, name check the other, governors, and of course we all share the same president. But I would probably, highlight my own governor, Hochul, because ultimately she's accountable to me, and Governor Murphy, even though I grew up in New Jersey, is not accountable to me. So I would highlight perhaps your own particular governor, as well as naming the others, and of course our commonly shared president.
And in fact, Brian had put in the chat that he is going to be submitting in New Jersey. So Governor Murphy,
Oh,
he's your guy.
Franklin. Oh, Franklin. Right, I grew up in Highland Park. Woo.
Yep, that's
So-
great. I mean, I'm from New Jersey too. And, the thing is, right now, the important thing is to get these written comments into the DRBC portal. Because then the governors of the 4 states and the Army Corps of Engineers representing the federal government is going to vote on whether or not to change the rules like we want them to be changed, or to accept the rules or put them back out in a changed form. But they're going to be voting on these rules. But we're not targeting them specifically now, only because we want the DRBC officially to have our comments on the record that has to then be responded to by law. By the commissioners, the 4 governors and the Army Corps.
We have a question in the Q&A. What rationale can a group in other parts of the state use to make comments to support you? I just wanted to note that if you're in Pennsylvania, I've been begging people, because outside of where I live, here in the basin where I'm protected, the way we all are in the basin, is everybody sitting in frack land. And this is very directly affecting them. And so we actually did something in one of the other organizations I'm involved in after the ban to say, wait, what about us? We're the ones who are on the receiving end of this thing. And this is just such a perfect illustration of how, they're willing to protect the Delaware River Basin, but not all the other people out there who have been dealing with this for over a decade now. So if you're in that part of the state, bring that up. But if you're in any part of any of the states, I think, the other thing, the other general point to a lot of people these days, because it's on their minds, is climate change. And of course, we have a whole week that we dedicated to climate change, so that, the climate change is everybody's NIMBY issue. This is what matters to everyone. And this is just making it, exacerbating the problem that is already out of control, and they're going in absolutely the wrong direction if they say yes to this thing. And so I would say that, if you want to pick out one argument that you think is going to resonate with people around you, to get them commenting and saying, what are you doing? I think that to me is a really important thing to be doing now, regardless. And I guess, if you pay any attention to the fracking issue, even if you're not sitting in the middle of it, the stories are heartbreaking. And I think you've probably all heard them, and what's happening to communities, even if you're not in one of them, it's really just criminal. And so, I would say personal stories are really important. I think got mentioned right up top by Eric. It's so important to personalize this and let people know that this is not acceptable to you. And so I think, people can relate when they see that you're worried about climate change, or you're worried about what's happening to your fellow Pennsylvanians or people in the next state over who are being, harmed so badly. I mean, it's just horrifying. So anyway, I think that's what I would say. But if anybody wants to add anything.
I would just add a lot of areas outside of the Delaware River watershed drink water from the Delaware River. So 7 million people in New York City on any given day could be drinking water from the Delaware River watershed. 1/3 to about 1/3 of the population of New Jersey drinks water from the Delaware River, whether or not you live anywhere near it. It's put in canals, it's put in pipes, and it's brought all over New Jersey. In Pennsylvania, the water that it has the largest watershed, landmass in the watershed, and it has the most people living in the watershed. But the water in the Delaware River watershed supports 8 million people. And if we lose our water quality, we've lost everything. There's no other place to go for the water. So what you end up doing is drinking polluted water and harming health. So that, I think, is another thing to look at. Like if you live in central New Jersey, over next to the Atlantic coast, you're likely drinking Delaware River water because it goes over there. So just think about it that way too. And I think that shared resource is something that's everybody is starting to really talk about water as being our new scarce resource that is being wasted, and more awareness is being brought up about that as well. So I think just precious water and the fact that you can't unpollute it once you've polluted it.
Anybody else?
Yeah, there's a lot of people who have family in the Delaware River Basin, have economic interests, have a second home, vacation in the Delaware River Basin, grew up here. These are all reasons to be connected to as well as business interests to protect the area, and also the idea that, okay, this area is being protected, but that area is being harmed. Well, by protecting the Delaware River Basin, then we can move on to protect other areas. I mean, at first, it was only New York City that spoke out against fracking. And now New York State has banned fracking. The Delaware River Basin has banned actual drilling. But it all, it started with New York City saying, no, not in our watershed. And by starting somewhere, we can extend to a lot of other places. Plus, you have another question in the chat.
Yep. And this is a really good one because I think it touches on some of the rules we were going over. It says letters to the editor often are just published online and not in print. Is there any way to get the letter in print as well? And so following those guidelines, and the link is in the chat now, and it will be in the follow-up email that shows you what those guidelines look like. You should find for your own paper, though. You'll get a sense of what they're really going to take seriously. And I honestly, I mean, I love breaking rules, but not in this case, because they're going to pay attention to word length. They're really going to word count. They're going to pay strict attention to that. And so the more that you are making it easy for them, the more likely it is that they're going to publish it in the print version. But don't forget that one of the benefits of getting it onto the online version, again, if you include sources like the link to the portal, they're going to be able to find their way into the comment portal at the Drbc that much more easily. So it's not a bad thing to get it online. Ideally, it would be in both, but if you only get online, that's not a bad thing. So include that source, and it will very likely end up being, a way for people to find it that wouldn't have bothered maybe out of a print letter. So it's, 6 of one, half a dozen the other. None of it's bad.
And if I could just quickly note, if it's online, then it's easier to share on social media. So any and all letters that you get printed or published, please, tweet them out, put them on Facebook, share them, via email or otherwise. But, again, I'm an old fashioned, print guy, but, it's definitely easier to share stuff online.
And I see Brian is asking, his coming right to the hosts about providing the DRBC comment portal. That's going to happen at the very end. So you'll have it on the last slide, but it'll be in the email. So look for your email because it's a lot easier to click on it than write it down or take a screen thing and then have to translate it over. But I'm seeing
Put
that we
that
have.
in again, by the way. I thought I put it in once, but I'll put it in again right now, the comment portal.
Yeah, if you don't get on right away, and I don't know that he didn't, but sometimes you don't see the chat before you were there. So if you know, if you want to repeat it, it's not a bad idea now that everybody's here.
Yeah, I'll do it right now.
Great. Do fracking companies respond with taking responsibility? I'm sorry, taking responsibility for pollution to ecosystems. I'm sorry, I
No.
don't mean to laugh.
I mean,
No.
our goal is to try to make polluters pay, to make polluters accountable for the pollution that they spew out through their activities. But unfortunately, the fracking industry is a really good example of an irresponsible polluter.
Plus,
Yeah.
plus they have exemptions that protect them from liability. That's why they got the exemptions. Some of those exemptions happened fairly quickly when helpful laws were put in, and others the companies fought for 25 years to get and got to protect them from exactly those liabilities, which would have protected populations. So here we are.
That's right.
Yeah.
Make sure you comment.
And they bend over backwards within our state government, I can at least say for Pennsylvania, to make it easy for them to do those things. I mean, we have to deal with radioactive waste in Pennsylvania all the time now. And our DEP says, oh, we can clean that out. Don't worry about that. We can get rid of it. So, you know, no, they don't take responsibility. Nobody makes them.
But we try to.
We do.
That's one of the goals that all of us activists and many of you spend a lot of time doing, trying to make the polluter responsible and accountable, and trying to unmask when the bureaucracy is defending them.
Yeah, so it's a thing. But thanks to all of you for being the people you are that you get on a webinar to talk about letters to the editor. I'm gonna kick it over to Eric right now to take us out.
Cool. Yeah. So I just want to kind of quickly wrap up by saying thank you for joining us this evening. We look forward to seeing your letters online or otherwise. A quick reminder, we've got a social media storm coming this Monday, so stay tuned for a social media toolkit with sample tweets and so forth. So we're going to hit them left and right on social media and the letters to the editor page. It's going to be awesome. And then we're going to close out with another round of comments by the 28th, as has been repeatedly urged upon you. Please try, if you can, to write and submit an LT this week. And as mentioned, certainly post it, share it on social media. And finally, I'll just put my email address again in the chat. If you have any questions, and particularly if you happen to publish an LTE, we may or may not see it on social media, but please, email it to me. I'll make sure to share it with everybody else here, and we'll look forward to seeing the fruits of our labor succeed. And Vicky, what a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. Thank you. Thank you. We inspire each other. And I want to thank all the folks, Karen, Barbara, Tracy's leadership of this coalition. It's absolutely been instrumental. So big thanks to all of you and all of us, and together we're going to win.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.